So what distinguishes a web application from a web server is the interactivity and the dynamic nature of a web application versus just a web server. Right now, we really just have a web server. We don't really have anything dynamic. Part of what makes a web application dynamic is we want the content that we send to the client to be responsive in some way to like whatever that client is doing or whatever the web application is doing. It's not necessarily going to send exactly the same web page every single time to the client. If that's all we need then we just need a web server, and there are better tools for that than using Node. But that's not what we're headed. We want to build a whole journaling app here, and so we want that interactivity part. So I'm just going to introduce this a little bit. We'll see if we get through all of this or not. We're going to use a technology called EJS. Um, EJS is a way to more flexibly define our HTML pages. And there are other technologies besides EJS. Again, EJS is a good fit for us because it's relatively straightforward. Um, the components of EJS are familiar because basically in an EJS file, we can combine JavaScript and HTML together. That's how we make dynamic HTML content. So yes, it's a new technology for us, but it's using things we're familiar with, JavaScript, HTML. The way EJS works is the JavaScript is run on the server. And after the JavaScript is run, all we have left is HTML. And that rendered HTML is then sent to the client. Okay. So we're still running all this JavaScript code on the server, not on the client at this point. The way we do this is we use these what are called scriptlet tags. It's a less than a percent and equal sign, some JavaScript code, and then another percent and a greater than symbol. And then we can pass variables from that route function we wrote into the EJS file that we can use inside of the JavaScript code, which is kind of cool. I want to focus a little bit on the file layout here because this is where stuff gets confusing. Here's our file explorer. I just took a screenshot of it from VS Code. And I want to distinguish between all the files and code that runs on the server, which is all of this stuff from like node modules all the way down. All of this code runs on the server, right? Here's router.js that we wrote. In a moment, we're going to look at index.ejs, but this EJS file runs on the server, does not run on the client. Here's server.js. The stuff that runs on the client is defined inside of the assets folder, and that's where our cascading style sheet is, images are, and client-side JavaScript. So one of the challenges of writing a web application is keeping straight in our head, these files run in the Chrome JavaScript engine on the client. These JavaScript files run in the Node.js JavaScript engine on the server. And what we can do here is different than what we can do here. And so it's really important we keep straight where things are running. It has huge security implications as well. Sometimes index.ejs gets confusing because the JavaScript runs on the server, that's the render part, and then the resulting HTML is sent to the client. Okay, so it kind of spans that world, that division between client and server. So yesterday we were talking about EJS files as a reminder, where an EJS file is this wonderful template tool that lets us put JavaScript inside of what would otherwise be an HTML file and then render it on the server and then send it to the client. So it makes it possible for us to dynamically generate web pages, which is super nice. So we're going to see how that works with like a relatively simple example to start, and then we'll keep building on it. So I'm now in router.js from before. Here is the function that runs when the client requests the root endpoint, just the slash. And currently, we're just sending the text hello world. It's just that text is what shows up in the browser. We now want to render an EJS file and send an HTTP file back. And there's a couple steps we have to do to pull this off. First, we're going to no longer just send hello world. So I'm going to delete the rest of this. And instead there is a method, a function we can call on our response called render. And then we specify the name of the EJS file we want to render. So we're going to, in a moment, we're going to create a file called index.ejs. So we're going to specify that we want to render that indexed EJS file and send that back to the client. As we build out this web application, and as you do more web application stuff, we'll have more and more endpoints. Usually these get commands will have a render near the end where we specify an EJS file that gets rendered and sent back to the client. Express supports a wide variety of what are called like template engines, of which EJS is one. So we need to tell Express that we're using EJS. And the way we do that is we go back to our server.js file. And we need to, let's do it up here. After we've created our Express app, we need to set the template engine to EJS, which generates HTML with embedded JavaScript. And again, because I wrote a very descriptive comment and knew what I wanted, GitHub Copilot is helpful in saying, here's how we do that. We call the set method on our Express app. We want to set the view engine property, and we want to set it to EJS. If we were to use a different template engine, we would just specify a different template engine here. But as I shared yesterday, we're going to stick with EJS because it's relatively simple and straightforward and meets our needs. So this is required to make sure that Express knows we're using EJS, because otherwise when we call render, it won't know what to do. So now it will know what to do when we call render. So the final step is to actually create the EJS file. We're going to put all of our EJS files inside of the views folder. And so I'm going to highlight the views folder and click the little plus file thing here and type index.ejs. We could type an entire HTML file here. We could embed the JavaScript as we want. Often, so we're kind of thinking ahead a little bit, often you have the same type of information at the top and bottom of your web pages. You have a common header, you have a common footer, and then several different pages. We don't want to write the code over and over again, or even copy and paste the code over and over again for the header and the footer, because that's a maintainability nightmare. If we want to then change the header, we have to change it in every EJS file. So instead, we can actually include other EJS files as our headers and footers. And I've already created those for us. So if we open up the include folder, we can see there's an underscore header.ejs. And this is the beginning of our HTML file. It's got the doc type, it's got the HTML tag, it has all the head stuff. The title is Habits of Mind Journal right now. It's including some style sheet stuff we'll talk about later. And it opens the body tag, and that's where it stops. And then in the footer.ejs file, you can see there's not much there right now. It closes the body tag, it closes the HTML tag. So if we include the header, then we just basically add the HTML that goes inside the body within our new index.ejs file. So I find it really hard to type HTML comments because I never remember like what the symbols are, and they go on for 4 characters, which seems excessive. So you can just hit Windows, or on Windows hit Control/, or on the Mac hit Windows/ on these keyboards, and it creates an HTML comment for you, which is super nice because that just typed 7 characters I can never remember. And then I can have a little comment here that says like include header. Oops. I also struggle with the tags for EJS that I shared yesterday, but we'll get used to them. GitHub Copilot already almost has it, so I'll hit tab. So again, it's the less than symbol, %, and then include, and I need the path here to the header file. The header file's inside, it's all relative to this EJS file. So I have to actually say, oops, include slash underscore header. And then we close our EJ or our JavaScript with percent and greater than symbol. So that's what that looks like. And then I like to wrap this in comment blocks just so I know like what's going on here. It makes it easier later. And then I'm going to add another comment block here that says main site. This is like where I'm going to put our actual HTML. I'm going to put it inside of a main tag. And I'm just going to say hello world here. And then I'm going to close out the main site. This is a style you'll sometimes see in HTML or EJS files. I have a comment at the beginning and the end of different blocks of things, and I use the slash kind of like we use a closing tag slash. That's just a convention. It's certainly not required. It just helps me visually keep track of like, oh, here's header stuff. Here's the main site stuff. And then as you might imagine, I can do an include footer at the end. It figures out the path correctly, and I can close out that tag. So again, we could type entirely just HTML code inside of this EJS file and it would work just fine. And that's what we're doing right now, right? There's no, other than these include statements, there's nothing JavaScript special going on here. It's just HTML. We will pass variables to this EJS file later and add some JavaScript code to this file later. But for now, we're just kind of getting started with EJS. All right, let me see if there's anything else I want to add here. I think this is fine for now. This will be good. All right, let's run this and make sure it actually works. So again, as a reminder, be very careful with how you run all these things. You should always go to the Run and Debug button in your toolbar, select Node Server from the pop-up menu, press the Debug button here to start debugging. When you're done debugging, you should press the red Stop Debugging button here in your debugging pop-up toolbar to make sure that you don't end up with that access port in use error. Once I start the server, I can look in the debug console, make sure it says server started. I can switch over to the client, start that, opens up Chrome, still says hello world, okay? So it doesn't look really any different here, except now the title of our tab says Habits of Mind Journal, right? So there is a change, and that comes from the header that we included. So here's where we are at the moment. I'm going to leave the server running because as we make changes, NodeMon will automatically reload it.